a written response Q&A at the end of the webinar. We won't be doing a live Q&A today. So let's get going. Our first speaker is Catherine Clift, who is the Executive Director, Biosecurity Services for Agriculture Victoria. Catherine has worked in government for over 15 years in Australia and New Zealand, spanning biosecurity, regulation and market access. It's an absolute privilege for us to have Catherine present in our webinar today. And just from Wine Victoria's point, I'd like to thank Agriculture Victoria very much for the ongoing and highly effective collaboration between our two organisations. So please welcome Catherine.
Thank you very much, Angie, for that very warm introduction. So I'll presume you can hear me okay. A thumbs up would be good. Excellent, fantastic. So I'm going to be providing a little bit of background around our national approach to phylloxera management, and I thought I'd just start with a little bit of context around biosecurity, which is obviously my bread and butter. So from my perspective, biosecurity is just so critical to supporting the health of Australians, their environment and the competitiveness of our key industries, particularly the agriculture sector, through biosecure trade networks. And Australia does have one of the strongest biosecurity systems globally. However, we do know that pest and disease outbreaks are continuing to increase in volume and complexity. So between 2012 and 17, the number of interceptions annually of biosecure risk materials at Australia's border rose by almost 50% to just over 37,000 items per year. So that just gives you an idea of the sort of scale of the challenges that we face when it comes to biosecurity. And to protect Australia, it's essential that we all continue to focus on this. It's really a shared responsibility. Government does our part, and it's really essential that we work very closely with industry and communities to be able to keep Australia free of really significant pests and diseases, and also manage those that are already here as well. Some of these risks that are driving the increased biosecurity issues. We know, increased trade, movement of people, obviously with COVID, that's been somewhat of a reduction in the movement of people, but certainly trade, continues to be a really strong driver there. Greater agricultural intensification, but increasing land use change as well. So increasing peri-urban farming, smallholders, more densely populated cities and changes in consumer expectations. So for example, increasing organic, free range production, things like that are all driving changes. Climate change, and that has a significant impact with some of the range establishment that we're seeing for established pests and diseases, and also the ability of new pests and diseases to be able to establish in Australia as well. And then unfortunately, we do see criminally motivated biosecurity threats as well. So illegal activities which have the ability to compromise our biosecurity status. And in some cases, we are seeing reduced effectiveness of some of our key tools that we use for biosecurity control, whether that's because of increased chemical resistance, or in fact, some of those tools are no longer available to us because of some of the concerns around use. So that just is a little bit of an overall introduction that gives you a flavour of the increasing challenges that we have in the biosecurity space. So certainly keeping Australia's pest industries free of pests and diseases is really critical to support trade and market access. And an outbreak of phylloxera obviously has significant impacts across the individual properties affected, reduced vine yield, increased production costs, compliance costs, restrictions on movements and supply chain management issues, and impacts around tourism and marketing activities as well. So limiting the spread, containing phylloxera between states and within states is very much a joint effort that involves industry, government and national and state-based regulators all working together. And the Tackling Phylloxera program is a really good example of everybody working together to be able to address phylloxera and prevent its spread. Thank you. Next slide. So we have invested really significantly in limiting the spread and impacts of pests and diseases that can impact on production and trade. And as I've spoken about, this is very much a joint effort between industry and government. And this is an example of where Victoria's made a significant effort in a number of different areas to address phylloxera and to improve the overall management of this. Thank you. So in terms of the CPHO unit, we have invested over $1.8 million via the AGIF, the Agriculture Investment and Jobs Fund, to tackling this program. And it is our CPHO unit, so headed by Rosa Cernov, who many of you would know, that's responsible for the management of phylloxera in Victoria. And this funding has been supported. It supports the aims of our Victorian wine industry development strategy, and some of the key projects delivered under this strategy include the Wine Growth Fund, Wine to the World, and the 5 pillars of tourism support. So the CPHO unit has taken real responsibility for the management of phylloxera in Victoria and the lead rollout for this really important program. The funding's been developed collaboratively in the support between Wine Victoria and Agriculture Victoria. And the strategy identifies the challenges and the opportunities across the wine value chain, establishing strategic priorities for the industry and supporting initiatives to better connect wine, food, and the regional tourism sector. So the strategy has a number of core platforms around business adaptation, wine tourism, exports, and obviously trade and industry leadership. So in terms of the midterm evaluation of the strategy, it found that it had delivered multiple benefits, including improved coordination and relations between the various contributors, so Wine Victoria, Wine Australia, and the Victorian government, really supported the development of cross-regional relationships and active support for the Wine Growth Fund, and improved industry awareness and the need for better biosecurity practices at the farm gate. And on-farm biosecurity measures are just so crucial for all of the pest and disease risks that we face. So tackling the spread of phylloxera is as critical today as it ever was, and the CPHO unit is still very much focused on working with industry. So I'll let Gary Darcy move on to talk about the achievements of this program, and you'll hear more about the success of this program over the coming months. And we're certainly very supportive of continuing this work. We've worked very closely with researchers, technical parties, and the affected industries to reduce the impacts of phylloxera and to help improve the management of this pest in Victoria. And these successes and others to come, I think, bode very well for the future of market access and for maintaining the viability of this really important sector for Victoria into the future. So very pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you today as part of this webinar, and really pleased to help contribute to understanding and improving knowledge around biosecurity and risk management for pests and diseases in the wine sector. So thank you, and I'll hand over to Gary.
Actually, Catherine's going to be myself, Damien Sheehan, but that's Gary's next up though, and I was going to jump in and talk about the wine industry perspective, I guess, and then Gary's going to address the actual program and get into some details. So thanks, Catherine, and really appreciate you joining us today. So also let me thank the plant health team. Some of the key people are talking today, and we'll meet others as we roll out the other webinars that are coming up as well. But particularly for the delivery of the Tackling Phylloxera program, but importantly for listening to industry and working with us to take a fresh look at this most difficult of viticultural pests, Phylloxera. Catherine referred to the wine industry development strategy, and it was the early work that we were doing on that strategy that prompted a meeting with the Plant Health Unit and Wine Victoria to reinvigorate the way we manage Phylloxera in the state. And the outcome of that meeting was this program, the Tackling Phylloxera program. At that point in time, so it was probably, I think it was about 5 years ago that we had that meeting. And at that point in time, the Yarra Valley region was coming to terms with the consequences of what living with Phylloxera was like and the cost burden that it imposed on their operations, particularly with respect to replanting their vineyards. And you can see on the graphic there that the estimates at the moment are put the value of replanting 1 hectare of vines at $60,000, taking into account the major cost there being a grafted vine. It's a big figure, but what's shocking is when you put it in the context of a region-wide replanting program, which is eventually what will come to pass for the Yarra Valley region as Phylloxera moves within that region. The total cost for replanting would approximate $130 million for the region. But then you look at the production gap that results from lost revenue from wine production, and you're looking at over $1 billion. So it's massive cost to industry. The Yarra Valley experience really highlighted the need that we needed a better management framework and a stronger, more coordinated industry response with respect to Phylloxera, but also biosecurity in general. So a strategic initiative like the Tackling Phylloxera program is what we needed. We also wanted industry to look beyond Phylloxera though and get a deeper understanding of biosecurity generally and biosecurity management. So broaden the view, I guess. And that's important because the way I look at it, I guess, is that our most important resource, the one that we most need to maintain, protect and preserve is the grapevine. So the Tackling Phylloxera program was designed to take us down the path of looking at biosecurity through that lens, developing our capacity as an industry to protect our most important resource, the grapevine. And in terms of the program developing capacity, there's just a couple of outcomes I want to mention. The first being the diagnostic tools. So with any pest or disease, a rapid and reliable diagnostic tool is essential for effective and responsive management. So Gary's going to talk about those tools in a bit more depth, but there's no doubt that their development is a major advance secured through the program. The other outcome is the Gategate app, and I think Gary's going to talk about that as well, or we'll hear about that anyway in this webinar. So that's a new app available to everyone now. You can look it up through your app store, and you'll be able to search and find Gategate, and it covers the movement protocols around the movement of grapes, juice, must, the whole thing. Very much about getting the tools into the hands of the grower. So they're just a couple of outcomes, and they're the tangible outcomes, I guess, of this program. And to an extent, they addressed knowledge gaps that have been identified by industry. But as an industry, we're trying also to work out how best to defend the key resource, the grapevine, and we can't just defend against one pest. We can't just be looking at only Phylloxera, we need to prepare for the unknown as well. So to getting back onto that theme of adopting a broader approach in managing Phylloxera, if we do it through the program along the way, we can protect ourselves also from exotics, or if necessary, respond to an exotic incursion. One that springs to mind immediately is Xylella or Pierce's disease, which is rampant in California. Something like that, which has a lot of hosts, the risk is high, and we need to start thinking in terms of protecting ourselves against those broader risks. In the past, when we'd sort of been making some, a presentation on Phylloxera or biosecurity, we would talk about globalisation and free trade agreements. That's kind of the best go-to to explain connectedness, I guess, the global connectedness. Now, of course, we've all experienced the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's unfortunately, but it's a very relevant analogy and more apt to what we're talking about in terms of biosecurity and how Australia manages biosecurity. So being an island obviously gives us a fantastic line of defence, but once the virus is here, it changes that way you defend, and each one of us then is required to play their part. And so the parallel for biosecurity is that each of us needs to play our part, and that includes every grower, winemaker, contractor, the whole supply chain. It includes organisations like Wine Victoria, and it also includes our government partners. All the time they're at the centre is the grapevine. And so the key to our biosecurity management is the farm gate. Initiatives like the Tackling Phylloxera program, they're going to lead us down that path towards farm gate biosecurity. We hope that the program will eventually raise awareness across all wine regions in Victoria, not only biosecurity risk, but also biosecurity best practice. And as I've said, we do focus on Phylloxera in Victoria, but the right practice model will enable industry and government deal with other biosecurity risks, not just Phylloxera. The ultimate goal, though, if we to adequately address our biosecurity risks, is national coordination. Without that, we're operating in a bit of a vacuum. It's good, though, after a few false starts, our peak industry body, Australian Grape and Wine, had started laying the foundations for that national coordination. But the fact of the matter is that we're basically starting from scratch after the National Vine Health Steering Committee, which did play that role, dissolved. And so we've got to reconnect with government, and that takes time. So in Victoria, we can really count ourselves lucky. We're fortunate knowing that we've got a strong linkage with government, strong enough that they made this investment into the viticulture industry. And I guess that's my key message. In my time with Wine Victoria, we've worked across areas like export trade and domestic trade, tourism, tax and so on. But to me, nowhere is the relationship with government more important than with the environmental challenges our industry faces. And biosecurity is right up there. With each, government needs us as much as we need government to manage the risk. By working together, then we can manage to make industry more competitive, as Catherine mentioned, makes us more sustainable. That helps the economy be more competitive, more sustainable too. So I commend the government's commitment to our industry through the Tackling Phylloxera program. And down the track, I really hope that we'll be capitalising on the foundations of the program and the work, the outcomes, and drive better biosecurity practice across the whole of the industry. That's all I wanted to say. I'll pass on to Gary Darcy. Gary's the manager of domestic quarantine market access. He was the project leader. He's the project leader of the Tackling Phylloxera program. And so he'll dive a bit deeper into what the program was about. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Damien. I can assume from Damien's kind words that we've had a positive outcome, you know, through the Tackling Phylloxera program on industry, but also with the routine business as usual work that we do on a day-to-day basis with growers across the state. I suppose the Tackling Phylloxera program really came about from experiences the unit has gained through working with industry and affected growers on a whole range of viticulture issues that have been tied up with biosecurity incursions, whether it be phylloxera or exotics over the journey. And one of the, I suppose, the key drivers for looking at new and innovative ways of managing our biosecurity was to I suppose, start to look at ways to identify addressing gaps in our knowledge of the way industry work, but also getting a better understanding of the way growers actually produce grapes and actually manage their farms in context with what that might mean from a biosecurity or farm gate biosecurity perspective. Just go to the next slide, Megan, if that's all right. So funding for the Tackling Phylloxera program, it's been mentioned that it, you know, came out of the wine industry development strategy. You know, there was a fair bit of heat a number of years ago around what was happening in the Yarra Valley regarding some detections within the zone and changes around the zone boundary. There was a number of issues raised by industry around diagnostics, reporting, awareness, some knowledge gaps in understanding, you know, the social drivers around on-farm biosecurity practices and how we could, I suppose, promote that in a different way to get a greater uptake within what is a very diverse industry. So I suppose the last dot point on that slide there is really important in that from, I suppose, my perspective and the CPHO Unit's perspective, you know, we reached out to industry at the early stages of this initiative and really tried to get from industry their opinion on how we could improve things collectively. So as a regulator, you know, we are very constrained by our national obligations and our powers under the Act. But it was very, very important to look at ways that we could capture the views of national industry leaders and ensure that their input into these programs was well reflected. We'll just go to the next slide there, please, Megan. So the team over the next 5 or 10 minutes will go over a number of highlights that the program has delivered so far. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's a number of issues that we know our industry have demonstrated a strong interest in. So unfortunately, the first point that I'll be talking about is about our investment in enhanced surveillance and improved R&D outcomes. Unfortunately, Dr. Paul Cunningham can't be here today to talk about those issues. He's the expert. I'm pretty clear to say I'm not on R&D, but one of the key issues that industry raised with us very early days was the need for an improved diagnostic standard for the rapid identification of particularly the early life stages of phylloxera, which from time to time had proven difficult to confirm through morphological analysis. So through the program, we've invested in the development of a LAMP technology. So LAMP stands for loop mediated isothermal amplification. It's a molecular test, which is 100% effective on all life stages of the insect, from eggs through to adults. And importantly, it's a test that's been used across a whole range of other biosecurity threats like Queensland fruit fly, varroa mite, marmorated stink bug, and it's well regarded at the national level as being 100% effective and a very useful diagnostic tool for identification of high-risk biosecurity threats. So basically, the program funded the development of a Phylloxera system for diagnosis through a LAMP test. The test itself has now been developed and is going through the final stages of verification from I suppose, a practical real world perspective. I'll just click on to the next slide, please, Megan. Critically, what came out of some of our discussions with industry regarding how things were unfolding in the Yarra and across the state was some work that we commissioned to get a better understanding of the biology of Phylloxera and how that might influence our risk mitigation strategies to ensure that they're least trade restrictive, accurate and legally defendable. So through some work that we did with a couple of key industry leaders and our AVR team, we've now funded some work to look at the biology of Phylloxera. A number of our current management strategies that we have in place now are largely based on work on the biology of Phylloxera that was completed a number of years ago. Our researchers, our technical people in the industry are saying that it may be operating differently, and you know, it is worthwhile to start to have a look at what how this insect actually operates in the field. And from a contemporary biosecurity perspective, can we look at, you know, changing some of our restrictions, changing some of our advice to industry, and, you know, leading to an overall improvement in its management. Next slide, if that's all right, please, Megan. So some of the other highlights, I won't go into great detail because I know the team want to get through their presentations. We've invested in additional work around early detection systems, you know, further evaluation of genotype specific rootstock relationships. You know, that's been a long-standing program that the department has run to give advice to affected growers, and a very important program. Constantly evaluating our diagnostic protocols, particularly disinfestation. We provide a lot of guidance to growers that are managing Phylloxera in the field, and it's important that the advice that we do provide is technically justified and defendable. And one of the passions of Paul Cunningham, with a long career in biocontrols, is they're starting to look now, they're being AVR, are starting to look at re-evaluating biocontrol options for Phylloxera down the track. Next slide, please, Megan. Now, let me hand over to Melissa Burton. Melissa's been directing our Phylloxera rezoning program on the Mornington Peninsula for the last year or two. It's been a project that we've been working our way through over a number of years now, in close collaboration with the MPVA, and also with good support from some of our industry colleagues in other sectors. So over to you, Melissa.
Thanks, Gary. Hello, everyone. So the Mornington Peninsula rezoning project has been a collaborative effort with the MPVA, so the Mornington Peninsula Vignerons Association, the Mornington Peninsula Shire Council, and Agriculture Victoria. So the MPVA, they've long understood the risk that Phylloxera poses to the area, and they've had a demonstrated long relationship working with research partners and working with Agriculture Victoria. And so through this collaborative relationship came the project proposal for the Mornington Peninsula rezoning project. And in theory, it was to survey the region for the status of Phylloxera to determine if it was present or absent, with the intention of rezoning the region as free of Phylloxera, so a Phylloxera exclusion zone. And really the benefit to this, the key benefits is that essentially when it's deemed a Phylloxera exclusion zone, it means that the region will be protected by a piece of legislation called a control area. And that means that any plant material, Phylloxera host material, plant material, or used equipment coming into the region needs to come through under a permit. So high risk movements aren't permitted, and those that are able to be mitigated with treatments, lower risk, are permitted to come into the area. So that essentially protects the region from Phylloxera transfer with people doing the right thing. And the other benefit is improved trade and market access. So that means that if the region's deemed Phylloxera exclusion zone, that it would enable trade with other Phylloxera exclusion zones, which is also the western half of Victoria, so the existing Phylloxera Victorian exclusion zone. And so the commercial property surveys, they commenced in late 2017 and they've just been finalised now this month, so January 2021. And the survey procedure follows the National Phylloxera Management Protocol, so the NPMP, and that outlines the steps that you need to take to do these surveys. And so 242 commercial properties have been surveyed throughout the life of the program. Some properties through the 4 years had vines removed, and additional properties were identified through the term of the project. And so these have come about from referrals, typically by seeing us active in the area doing surveillance in the first year, and by referral, a lot of those additional properties that were determined were on the smaller size. And then in summer last year, we were intending on surveying amenity vines. So amenity vines are hobby blocks or ornamental shade type vines. And as part of the NPMP protocol, these need to be surveyed as well. But unfortunately, due to Agriculture Victoria's commitment to the bushfire emergency response work and then the COVID-19 pandemic, that work got delayed. And so we've just finished, started December, just gone, and we've surveyed these amenity vines. And so amenity vines, they can be a little trickier to find. So the MPVA was great in they provided a list of commercial properties to be surveyed, but the amenity vines can be far more difficult to determine because you look down to even just 5 grapevines on a property. So we relied on a notice that went out to all the ratepayers on the Mornington Peninsula Shire. And so you'll see on the slide a notice went out, and that resulted in a great report rate of amenity vines to be inspected. And so it was actually a great opportunity to liaise with all different types of stakeholders through this project. You know, you've got right up from commercial growers to people who just have ornamental vines in their backyard, not necessarily fruit producing. And it was great to have those biosecurity conversations with all types of stakeholders and raise that general awareness beyond the extent of the extensive communication program that had been run as part of the project. And so essentially, we followed the NPMP protocols in what we've done with the work. And then we've also this year introduced using the LAMP tool that Gary's just finished speaking about. And so it's been really excellent to be able to use this new tool to verify root samples. So we've taken the root samples, we've had a look at them, we've seen no visual symptoms for Phylloxera on the roots, but you've got that extra layer of confidence provided through running samples through that machine. It's a very quick tool as well. So it was great to be able to use that, and we will actually touch on that in future webinars as well. So at present, the team, we're reviewing the data that's been collected through the project work and preparing a final report to progress the review of the region to hopefully be classed as a Phylloxera exclusion zone. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Paul, and Paul's going to talk to us more about our communication work.
Thank you, Melissa. I had control of 2 projects under the Tackling Phylloxera program, one being the social research and the second a communications, a statewide communications project. And I'll just starting on the social research. Look, the aim of that was really just to try and identify and then understand, I think, those attitudes that growers hold that decide whether or not they either adopt or reject best practice farm gate hygiene behaviours. I spoke, and I did that back in 2018, spoke to over 48 growers. I also presented at a couple of forums in Heathcote and the Mornington Peninsula. And in that research, I also try to get a handle on some of the complex mechanisms at play that influence those attitudes and behaviours that growers display, such as not just the pests, but they have to deal with the environment and climate change and water availability, market access problems. I've got a little video. So I did the report back in 2018, but Gary had the great suggestion, and rather than a report, to produce a video of the findings that came out of the social research. I've just got a little small clip here that I'll go to. I won't show it all, it's 3 or 4 minutes, but I'll just show a little bit, Megan, just to give everyone a flavour, some of the research that came out of the social research project.
Management. To find an answer to this, Agriculture Victoria undertook a social research project in 2018. The research looked into attitudes of Victorian wine grape growers concerning their on-farm biosecurity and phylloxera management practices. I know what biosecurity is. It's that TV show. Not exactly. Depending on the attitudes of the growers and managers to best practice on-farm phylloxera management, their biosecurity actions can play a critical role in preventing the spread of phylloxera and other biosecurity risks that are never far away. So, what are the attitudes that determine whether or not growers either adopt or reject best practice on-farm phylloxera management? Resignation. The social research showed this was the most common attitude of larger operators, particularly those located within the Maroondah phylloxera infested zone of the Yarra Valley. Many growers from the Yarra Valley region who participated in the research believed there was little they could do to stop the spread of phylloxera, despite most, if not all, implementing best practice. Listen. Most of us believe that best practice biosecurity strategies are worthwhile doing to prevent the spread of phylloxera. But let's be realistic. Now, I'll bet you London to a brick that the insect will spread due to circumstances growers like me find almost impossible to control. You know, we can't always be sure about hygiene standards when you've got a heap of movement of crews and machinery between properties. There are a lot of time and cost pressures on us, especially at harvest. He's got a point. For many growers, other issues like making a profit had shifted the focus away from best practice phylloxera management. According to the McKenna report, profitability is the most fundamental issue impacting the majority of businesses in the Victorian wine industry. Growers are regarded as the most vulnerable in the industry in terms of profitability. Complacency. The research showed how several growers believed they were somehow immune to phylloxera infesting their properties. Chill out. I'm growing my grapes on sandy soils. I have my own harvesting equipment. I don't let anyone come onto the property unless I know about it. And I've been using the same contract crew for years. Besides, I reckon I'm safe because my property is located in a phylloxera exclusion zone. Yeah, I'm pretty satisfied that I've done enough. No worries, mate. Indifference. There were many commercial growers in the King Valley, Rutherglen, Sunraysia and Yarra Valley regions who believed that phylloxera was a non-issue. If you want to beat the threat of phylloxera, just replant on resistant rootstocks. Best practice biosecurity. I've got other things to worry about, you know. Have you heard about climate change? Looked out the window recently? Where's the rain they promised? Resignation, complacency and indifference. These attitudes commonly translated into on-farm biosecurity practices or behaviours that were inconsistently applied across the state. Many growers were thorough with their on-farm practices, but some weren't. The results of the social research also hinted at something else happening invisibly in the background, something which might go some way to explaining the cause of these inconsistent practices.
Thanks, Megan. So what I learned that the management of Phylloxera, or the management of Phylloxera movement, it is a complex system, and changing attitudes and behaviours of growers, I think, requires us to understand the nature of the complexity. So I think I found that the real problem isn't the movement for Phylloxera, but our approach to problem solving for it. Look, that research is up on the AgVic website. If anyone wants to have a chat about it, more than happy to do so. But out of the research came a number of recommendations that help growers and industry better understand that complexity. And this kind of brings us to one of the reasons we're here today, which is twofold. And that's called, as was said earlier, to launch the webinar series. And that series will focus on some of the subjects, or tease out some of the information that will hopefully unpack the nature of the complexity associated with the industry. And on that aside, just want to thank everyone for coming today, to attending today's meeting. So that's much appreciated for your support. But the second reason coming here today, the social research, the recommendations found that a number of tools might help growers pull apart the complexity of biosecurity and to help them better deal with the problem of Phylloxera. And the first one that we developed was the Gategate app. Now, as you can see here, the app is now up on Apple Play, the Apple App Store and Google Play apps. The app really provides industry with as Damien said before, with an easily accessible, really convenient means for understanding movement conditions. The number of menus, you can see there on the photo that there are a number of menus that allows growers to choose where they're starting from and where they're going to. And that allows them to be compliant with the law so that no one's kind of breaking movement condition regs or legislation. We developed the app in close consultation with the MPVA. They played a leading hand in really developing an app by industry for industry. And we kind of helped guide that process too. So it's very much an industry-led app development. Then we went on to what I found from the research was that growers go to any number of sources of information. They'll use Google, they will use industry websites, they'll use any manner of ways to find information. So to create that single source of truth, we've created a Victorian viticulture information hub, and that hangs off the AgVic website. And really just tries to provide that single source of truth and that single version of the truth. And I conducted, at the same time I did the social research, I conducted a desktop review of good practice by Good Practice Communications. And I found that a really strong online presence with a good website can be invaluable when it comes to communicating. So, and if you can see there a couple of the tabs down below. In particular, one is viticulture research. So that will grow in time, and that'll be the domain of people like Paul Cunningham at AVR and Catherine Clark, who can use that hub to place the latest research. As I said, it was something that came out to me in social research. Growers really want to know what the latest research is, and then they find it hard to access it. So now with the information hub that hangs off the AgVic website, and it's got its own URL address, that'll be something that will help growers deal with particularly correct information flow, kind of trusted information flow. And then finally, the doco, if I can go to the next, create the doco. So what I've noticed at the department's great at delivering awareness. does a really good job. AgVic does a great job in delivering awareness. But I think sometimes it can be light on for making the intended audiences do what the awareness raising wants them to do. So I guess what I'm saying is the department's good at explaining the science and the what and the how, but it's sometimes the why that needs further thought and thinking. And that's kind of led to the development of this doco, which really focuses on the social reasons for doing biosecurity. And this is just a short clip from the main doco that's up on the website. If you could just play that, please. Megan?
I bought this property in 1998, and at that time there were no grapevines on it. In 98 we planted 11 acres of Pinot, which is the Pinot behind us here. And then about 2007 we planted another 4 acres of Chardonnay over on the hill. Then there's the cost of actually training the vines, but the costs are very significant, probably be in the order of $500,000 to put something like this in. We first suspected we might have a problem of some sort in about January 2019 when 2 panels behind us over here showed very, very weak growth. Everything else around them was strong, but these 2 panels had yellowing coloured leaves and shoots that were probably only a foot high. We had the Department of Agriculture come out early this year to actually diagnose whether we had it or not, and they confirmed we did. 2 small panels of vines that were a problem, it's now a very visible and very obvious problem, and particularly these vines here showing good green and good growth, and that's what we would have seen all the way up here only last year. You can see very, very easily the visible effects on the plant's growth and colour. All the shoots are only a matter of inches long. Basically, it's been stripped of its energy to grow by the Phylloxera bug in its root. And so it's hanging in there for dear life at the moment, but in a year or 2 it will be completely dead. In other parts of the vineyard, similar early signs that we saw last year popping up, and even further down near the river there, we have a patch, and that patch is emanated from a part of the vineyard that for a number of years has just been a little bit weaker. We thought maybe needed a bit more fertiliser, but we've noticed this year when Phylloxera has really taken hold that whole area has been decimated and is every bit as bad as what we've got up here. So it's obvious to us that it's in a number of spots, a lot of spots actually, in the vineyard now. It's a diagnosis of cancer that your vineyard is going to die. It's an incurable cancer. There's nothing really you can do about it except to let it run its course and start work again from the beginning. It might take 5-6 years to get the vineyard back up and running to its normal level of production. You're not going to get the level of quality until probably 10 years. So it's a long, expensive sort of process to get back to where you are now.
When Phylloxera is first found on a grower's property, it's a highly emotive time. A lot of the emotions that will come out are centred around embarrassment, I suppose, and possibly shame. It's not necessarily correct, but there's a stigma attached with Phylloxera. So the social impact of an incursion on a region is interesting in the sense that it becomes a reputational risk, more so from other parts of the industry, other regions within the area, rather than focusing on what the opportunity is in terms of being able to move forward. It's viewed as a potential way of spreading that pest to other areas. The subsequent detections after that aren't quite as socially and emotionally as poor, but the first person carries the weight of that initial detection. So we'd hope that that's not something that would deter people from actually making a report because of that emotional burden that can come with it. When the grower starts to become I guess probably more familiar with that incursion or that detection, then it can start looking at feelings like anger as to where it might have come from, and eventually it becomes a they lead themselves to resignation and they move on, and how they can then deal with the problem.
What we're faced with really is a very extensive job in ripping out those vines there. At pruning time, essentially cut off all the arms, and then we're going to have to go through and basically rip those rows again, disturb the whole trellising system, it's going to disturb the irrigation system. And then once we're through that whole process, we've got to go through with the replanting. Now, replanting requires us to replant on rootstock. It has to be grafted. And because of the spread of Phylloxera, there is waiting lists to get the material that you need to graft onto the rootstock. An expensive exercise, and it's also a slow exercise. Then once we've got that grafted material, then we'll have to replant the vines and rework the vines and retrain them as they grow and develop until we can eventually get produce from them again in many years. There are estimates, industry estimates of around about $60,000 a hectare. What they don't count is the fact that the vineyard will be out of production for at least 3 years and out of normal production for 5 years. The revenue loss associated with that is pretty significant. Biosecurity is it's an insurance policy. It'd be crazy not to try to look after that asset and protect it from a foreign invader like Phylloxera. But also, it can affect your neighbours, and it affects the livelihood, the financial position of people, and can destroy their livelihood. We don't want to see that happen to them, even if we're on rootstock and they're not. We don't want to promote an environment here on our property that's going to be conducive to spreading Phylloxera throughout the whole region or neighbourhood that we're in. It's a matter of protecting your own asset and also protecting the other assets of the industry.
So just back to me for a tick. So thank you for that. Before I hand back to Gary, who'll kind of wrap up and just provide a summary of some of the steps we're going to in the future, I just wanted to thank a few people who've kind of been very supportive and generous of their time throughout the social research and then the communications. People like Damien who spoke earlier. Damien Sheen's been a fabulous support for me, helping me through the comms area of, and putting out the messages to industry. People like you saw in the documentary, Andy Clark, he's been a great kind of fountain of knowledge. And then down to people like the Yarra Valley Wine Growers Association, Caroline there, Rob and Franco, great support throughout the duration of this project. And then over to the Mornington Peninsula Vignerons Association, Olivia and Tyson, who have been fantastic in helping us both in the rezoning project and developing the all-important app. And just finally, to people like Honeycomb Productions, who produced some great kind of video documentaries, material over the 3 years of the program, which will all go into the viticulture hub that we're producing and will be available. So that's kind of a history. We've been over there to document and record so much of this Tackling Phylloxera program. And then finally to people like Simon Way Designs, who were able to gave us kind of a look and a feel and made the whole project look a little bit special with logos and just the look of the whole project. So thank you. I'll hand over to Gary to wrap up.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So I suppose just to wrap up our first webinar, some of the next steps the team will be focusing on over the next year or two, in addition to our routine business as usual work with respect to biosecurity management for the state. As Melissa said, finalising our commitments to the Mornington Peninsula rezoning program. We'll be doing some further promotion of the Gategate app, particularly about building awareness. I think the Gategate app is a really easy way of accessing market access requirements for intrastate movement of Phylloxera host material. It's kept up to date. It's easy to use. Even I can use it, which surprised me. So I would say that makes it a fairly good tool. Further work with AVR around the phenology of Phylloxera biology and really putting that kind of risk management lens over the outcomes of that work to ensure our legislation is accurate and effective, and accordingly fulfilling our national obligation with working with our interstate colleagues to ensure that Victoria's approach to phylloxera containment and biosecurity management is undertaken in a manner consistent with national expectations. I see that we're probably just about on time. Look, I suppose really I'd just like to thank all the presenters today who have made their time available. This is the first webinar, so I think a few were a little bit apprehensive about how we'd get through the process, but it seems to me that it's gone pretty well. Always really appreciative of the kind support and guidance that Wine Victoria provides myself and my team at CPHO Unit in how we can work better with growers, and particularly everyone that's made the time available this morning to attend today's webinar. I know we're all busy. It's raining like cats and dogs out there, so maybe an indoor job wasn't a bad thing this morning, but I really appreciate your attendance. And as I understand it, the next webinar on outputs from the Tackling Phylloxera program and the biosecurity program in general will be communicated through Wine Victoria in due course. So just wanted to say thanks again to everyone for their time and efforts. Have a nice weekend, stay dry, and let's look forward to making Victoria's biosecurity a very strong program in the future. So, bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. That was absolutely terrific. The webinar has been recorded, and I'll be sending out through WineVic and through the AgVic channels the address of how to access that in the future. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.